Apartheid is a political system based on race. South Africa had this until recently. Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, ANC, fought against apartheid, with Mandela spending 30 years in prison. In 1994, democratic elections were held and Mandela became South Africa's first black president. The inauguration took place in Pretoria, attended by politicians from 140 countries. Mandela pledged that South Africa would never experience oppression again. The inauguration was followed by celebrations with people of all races together, including more than 100,000 South Africans. White supremacy led to racial domination in South Africa against the dark-skinned people of their own land, creating an inhumane society. The end of apartheid recognizes the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of skin color. He speaks of his people's sacrifices, including those of Oliver Tambo's, Walter Sisalu's, Chief Lethuli's, Yusuf Dadoo's, Bram Fischer's, and Robert Sobukwe's. Mandela learned the meaning of courage from comrades, emphasizing that people must be taught to hate. It is more natural to love. Mandela felt a glimmer of humanity even in prison from one of the guards. He describes the twin obligations all people have, to family and to community. The struggle against apartheid prevented fulfilling obligations, as attempts to live as human beings were punished and isolated. Personal freedoms were an illusion until he realized everyone who looked like him was not free, so Mandela joined the African National Congress. The desire for the freedom of his people to live with dignity transformed him. Freedom is indivisible, so the oppressor must be liberated just as the oppressed must be. Oppressors are prisoners of prejudice. Now starting, key takeaways. Apartheid in South Africa, a system of racial oppression, ended with Nelson Mandela's election as the country's first black president in 1994. Mandela's inauguration symbolized the triumph over racial injustice and the commitment to a future free from oppression. True freedom requires the liberation of both the oppressed and the oppressor, as oppressors are often prisoners of prejudice themselves. Mandela's courage was inspired by comrades and the belief that love is more natural than hate, even in the face of inhumane treatment. Now starting, memory aids. SANAD. Which represents, helps remember the country that experienced apartheid, South Africa, and the African National Congress, ANC, that fought against it, as well as the democratic elections that marked its end, and the dark-skinned people that experienced racial injustice. Pretoria's political pledge. Which represents, connects the location of Mandela's inauguration, Pretoria, with the lasting promise he made that South Africa would never experience oppression again. Two obligations, family and community. Which represents, reminds you of the two obligations Mandela describes. Obligations to family and obligations to community. The leaders felt dots of change. Which represents, helps recall some of the leaders who fought against apartheid, Dadoo's, Oliver Tambo's, Sisalu's. Courage, like love, must be taught. Which represents, connects the concept of courage with Mandela's observation that people must be taught to hate, implying courage is learned, just like love. If, indivisible freedom. Which represents, connects, indivisible, with freedom. Reinforces the idea that freedom cannot be separated or exclusive. It must apply to everyone, both the oppressed and the oppressor. See Dignity Dance. Which represents, freedom of his people to live with dignity. Now starting, fun facts. Nelson Mandela was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, sharing it with F.W. de Klerk. The African National Congress, ANC, was founded in 1912, originally named the South African Native National Congress. South Africa has 11 official languages, reflecting its diverse cultural heritage. Desmond Tutu, a prominent anti-apartheid activist, coined the term "Rainbow Nation" to describe post-apartheid South Africa. Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 18 years, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Sharpeville Massacre in 1960, where police killed 69 unarmed protesters, was a turning point in the anti-apartheid movement. The first democratic election in South Africa in 1994 had a voter turnout of over 80%. Now starting, Spotlight on Greatness. Spotlight on Greatness, Nelson Mandela. Mandela secretly authorized negotiations with the apartheid government as early as 1985, without the ANC's initial consent, recognizing the need for dialogue to end the conflict. Before becoming a lawyer and activist, Mandela worked as a night watchman at a gold mine to support his family. While imprisoned, Mandela studied Afrikaans, the language of the apartheid regime, to better understand his adversaries. Mandela was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize jointly with F.W. de Klerk in 1993 for their work in ending apartheid, a decision that was not without controversy. Mandela's prison memoir, Long Walk to Freedom, was smuggled out of prison piece by piece and published in 1994, shortly after his release. Mandela established the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund in 1995, focusing on improving the lives of disadvantaged children in South Africa. Queen Elizabeth II bestowed upon Mandela the Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. John, an honor he greatly valued. Mandela played a significant role in mediating conflicts in other African countries, including Burundi, after his presidency. In his later years, Mandela became an advocate for the fight against HIV/AIDS, publicly acknowledging that his own son had died from the disease. Mandela's ancestral name was Kolithlathla, which translates to troublemaker. In Xhosa, he was given the name Nelson by a teacher at school. Now starting, infographic. Apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid was a system of racial segregation in South Africa. It ended with democratic elections in 1994 and the election of Nelson Mandela. Mandela's fight and imprisonment. Nelson Mandela and the ANC fought apartheid. Mandela spent almost 30 years in prison for opposing racial segregation. 1994, democratic elections. In 1994, South Africa held democratic elections. Mandela became the first black president, marking the end of apartheid. International inauguration. The inauguration in Pretoria was attended by politicians from 140 countries, signifying the end of racial oppression. Freedom for all. Mandela believed freedom is indivisible, oppressors and oppressed must be liberated. Prejudice imprisons everyone. Freedom, an illusion? Mandela realized his freedom was an illusion until all who looked like him were also free, prompting him to join the ANC. Post-apartheid celebration. More than 100,000 South Africans celebrated together after the